Chapter 3, Troop Number 4, A Collection of Misfits. The trio stepped through the door that Fang had held open for them and wiped their feet on the mat by the door before Fang closed the door behind himself. Mac blinked his eyes, trying to adjust to the sudden shift in light. With it being midday, the overhead sun did not shine into any of the windows, leaving the bar dimly lit. Both Fang's and Zebu's eyes changed almost immediately due to their animalistic natures, allowing them to be able to see. Zebu's nose curled immediately as the door closed, hit by an unpleasant smell only he could detect. In one corner was a large convoluted piano-type device, a Bryson's Al-Anon. It had the keys of a piano arranged in 3 rows. On top of the piano case were 5 brass horn bells ranging in size, from tuba to cornet, and 1 woodwind bell flowering around its surface. On the sides of the case were attached various stringed instruments, a viola and violin on one side and a bass on the other. The bows were held by a clockwork armature, and the frets were operated by clockwork hands, the bass gaining an extra hand solely for plucking. At the bottom of the device were pivoting pedals that Mac knew controlled the volume of the instruments. About 4 years ago, Aunt Claire had signed him up for lessons to try to give him a hobby. He never showed up after the first lesson, however. Another set of 7 pedals was set into a small detached box connected by what seemed like a hollow rope to the drum set built into the apparatus. The percussion instruments jutted out of the frame of the Al-Anon at whatever angle they could fit, with clockwork mallets hitting the stretched material of the drums and sticks hitting the metal cymbals. The Al-Anon emanated sounds from all the instruments at its disposal, mixing brass, strings, piano, and percussion to make a wonderful atmosphere no matter the occasion. The Al-Anon was normally played by a duet, but in this case, one man sat alone on its bench who was missing 1 leg, 1 hand, and half his teeth. He wore a black suit and white shirt, which both had holes in them, this being the case for all his clothes. The left leg of his suit pants hung looser below the knee, because his articulated false leg was smaller than his flesh and bone one. The leg ended in what looked like a large bird claw, a choice to possibly allow him to play better. The long claws can operate more of the pedals than what 2 feet would normally allow, with a talon operating 1 pedal each. This appendage decision seemed very difficult to walk on, though. He had 2 formal neckties on side by side, corners touching. At the end of each tie were little brass fingertips woven into the cloth. While Mac had seen certain bankers use one of these neckties as a third hand, he had never seen someone use 2 of them at once. More impressively, this man had to focus on what music he was playing, what each of his hands was doing, controlling the pedals beneath him, and intricately controlling 2 extra limbs magically. A sign on one post that held up the rope surrounding the music area read, Ray Nash, former homeless man, current gifted musician, always success, story tips forever appreciated. Ray's hands, one silver and artificial, and the other flesh, danced across the keys. The air was filled with the sounds of increasing volume, the sounds of eating, the sound of Ray's jovial music in a 5/4 signature, and conversation. The walls were rough wood dotted with either pictures, paintings both moving and static, or the odd object to add to the allure. Lamps dangled from the ceiling by dot chains to keep the place from being pitch black. One painting caught Mac's eye. It depicted dragons playing poker, as a common green wyvern was dealing the cards. In the center of the room is a square room, presumably the kitchen, surrounded by a bar. Patrons occupied some of the chairs near the bar. A cash box could be seen peeking over the raised bar from the work surface below, facing the building's entrance. A menu hung on the wall behind the cash box, written in beautiful calligraphy. Chairs and tables acted as islands of a dense archipelago situated in a sea of grey floor tiles. The air felt cool in the building, but it was warmed up by the heat of breaths from the conversation. In one corner sat a large staircase seeming to lead behind the fireplace. The opposite corner held doors indicating them as bathrooms, with humorous signs to indicate who should enter and who should not. A fairy was taking her fill of ale from a normal-sized glass to a human, but to this fairy's stature might as well have been a bucket. She stood at 2.5 feet, this being the median height for the winged folk. She sucked on a straw that came over the top, not even attempting to try to lift it while sitting on a small chair placed on the table. He was trying to smooth talk her way into the heart of a female dwarf at the table who, by her smile, seemed to be buying into it, much to the chagrin of the other dwarf at the table who was also trying to weigh in on the dwarf woman. Both dwarves stood comfortably in the 4 to 5 foot range and carried the bulkier proportions indicative of their creed. A group of people were entertaining themselves by making shadow puppets along the wall without any light source, only by using their magic. Another collection of what seemed to be old drinking buddies was playing a game of dots turned into a drinking game. The rules seemed to be bullseye was the only way to skip a shot for that round, and where you landed on the board elsewhere determined the amount of shots to take. It seemed they knew they were bad at the game, indicated by the tabletop obscured by a tight grid of shot glasses. 2 gods sat at a table by themselves. It was obvious from their studded red gambesons and their helmets they were town gods. Presumably, these 2 men were on their off-shift guarding the mountain pass to enter the town. Mac knew this, as he had recognized these 2 in particular from the streets by the way they complained dramatically of the week-long seclusion in the God Tower every single time they had returned. A hooded character completely obscures his skin with cloth or bandages, slowly placing neatly cut sections of bloody meat into his mouth below a veil. A vampire most likely, who was deathly allergic to the sun and on medication to control the urge to drink blood directly from the source. Mac's head spun with stimuli over the strange beings that populated his surroundings inside the establishment. He was brought back to his senses by a lustful feminine drawl. Well, look what the dog dragged in," said a stunningly beautiful woman behind the bar. Suddenly the smell of roses, vanilla, and strawberries hit Mac's nose. The patrons on the stools all seemed a bit looser in posture due to her arrival, drunk from the intoxicating combination of her looks and sweet smell. "It smells in here like sweat, cigars, and alcohol," Cebu whispered with his nose scrunched. "I don't smell any of that. Now shut up," Mac quickly replied out of the corner of his agape mouth, not taking his eyes off the woman. He did not want Cebu's words to reach this woman's divine ears to have a chance to upset her. "Sapphire, is that a way to treat one of your valued customers?" Fang replied with a smirk, having mounted a boss stool. "The usual Fang baby." Sapphire asked her plump lips, potting seductively while asking the question. She then wiped the smirk off Fang's face with a quick kiss. "Yeah, plus some boiled potatoes and a small plate of fish for the kitten hawk all on my tab," Fang said, cheeks reddening, eyes narrowing yet smiling goofily, gesturing to Mac. That kiss turned the hardened warrior into a blushing schoolboy. Mac knew he would fare no better. Sapphire turned around and you could hear, even through the symphony of human noise, her heels clicking on the wooden floor, her hips swaying with every step. She peeked her head through a wooden door just near her and made conversational motions with her head, her 2.5-inch diameter hoop earrings swinging as she talked. She then walked back towards the trio before crouching down to grab something below the bar, balancing on her heels. Sapphire's curvaceous figure seemed to already be pushing her tight blue dress to the limit, but during her crouch, it strained even more. Standing up straight again, she held within her dainty fingers a glass of ice, a bottle held by the neck, and a bottle opener. Each of these fingers ended in long sharp painted nails that could tear a man's shoulders to ribbons. She set the glass and bottle on the counter and after removing its cap tipped its contents into the glass. She slid the glass to Fang before positioning herself between him and Mac on the opposite side of the bar. She leaned forward and placed her black silk-covered elbow on the counter. The silk was part of the bolero that covered her shoulders and 3/4 of her arms. The bolero did not, however, cover her ample cleavage, which she also rested on the bar. "And who might this be, puppy?" Sapphire asked Fang while she placed her flawless cheek into her palm, her makeup darkened eye peeking out between the pinky and ring fingers of her splayed hand, her long luscious lashes tickling her knuckles as she blinked. "My adoptive nephew will be joining us on the hunt at the end of the week. I'm sure you know a thing or two about nephews coming into the family business," Fang said in between swigs of his ale. Unlike my gormless nephews, this one seems promising, but does he have a name? Sapphire inquired, brushing her silky deep scarlet hair over her shoulder quickly. She pivoted her body to face Mac, fixing him with eyes whose irises lead Mac to believe she was named for their beautiful deep blue hue. Mac and Mrs. Sapphire, stammered Mac, clearly distracted by the vision of an angel of lust in front of him. Does that kitty on your shoulder have your tongue? And my last name is Glint, by the by. No need to call me Mrs. Sapphire playfully teased with a cute half-wink. The sound of glass shattering resonated through the air. Then Sapphire, without missing a beat, turned and bellowed, "Break another one and I'll break you." Blue flames as brilliant as her irises rose from her eyes. The threat was met with a polite drone of "Sorry, Sapphire," coming from the dot players from before. A fresh-faced man resembling Sapphire distantly exited from the kitchen carrying 2 plates of food. One was placed in front of Mac containing red-skinned potatoes steaming, the butter dolloped onto them, and the other much smaller plate with fish on it sat next to it. A sweet dark non-alcoholic elixir was placed in a thick glass next to it. Mac thanked the man and slid the fish plate off to his left, while Cebu took the opportunity of Mac's extended arm to walk down it and begin eating. Mac ate in silence, hearing nothing but the music and seeing nothing but Sapphire playfully discussing whatever it was with his uncle. As the song changed, the loud sound of blubbering can be heard. Fang turned his head and his shoulders dropped as he looked back at Sapphire. Then he gestured to Mac and Cebu to follow him while holding Mac's and his drinks. "Sorry, love, I gotta go. Bear has gotten deep into whiskey again," Fang said softly, then commenting to Mac, "He's an upstanding guy, my best friend even, but when he gets drunk his emotions come out in spades." Sapphire wiggled her fingers and smiled at Mac while they walked off before she went about tending to some pomade duties, such as greeting customers and filling drinks. Fang set Mac's drink down in front of an open chair at a table containing 4 interesting people. Mac, taking the location of his drink as an indication of where to sit, placed his and Cebu's unfinished meals in front of it, trying not to intrude on an emotional moment. After walking over to the table and pouncing up to its surface, Cebu continued to work on his plate. The loud blubbering was coming from quite a large and rather hairy man sprawled across the table. His head was placed sideways on its surface. His sunlightened auburn mane of shaggy hair and beard was soaked with a mixture of alcohol and tears. His widow's peak was hidden under the hair draped over his face. Fang rounded the other side of the man, while a very short blonde woman had been trying to console the large man from the opposite side. "Come on, Oxheim, we all got to go sometime," the small dirty blonde woman said, patting him on the shoulder. Oxheim seemed completely unconsoled by this fact. Fang slung his arm over the shoulder of the impressively large man, practically draping himself across him to comfort him. "Oxheim, you big bear, what's the matter with you?" Fang cooed, like when you try to console a child for breaking their favorite toy. "Fang, the world is just so cruel I just can't speak it," Oxheim said, muffled from not even lifting his head to speak. The deep voice filled with sorrow echoed in the cavity created by his arms. "His pet goldfish Goldie died this morning," said a mostly jet-black figure from the other side of the table. "His absence was common to Falport, another city to the southeast of Rosecross, near the coast. Specifically, this dialect originated from the back streets of South Falport, which was a rough gang-infested neighborhood. The only parts of this man that were not covered by what Mac presumed were tattoos were rings around his monocolor sea-green eyes, and the innards of his very long and numerously pierced elvish ears. These revealed the elf to be Caucasian. His nose seemed to have been broken frequently in his youth, causing a very kinked nose. His head and indeed the rest of the elf were shaved completely smooth, as if he shaved daily. He wore loose black cargo shorts tightened to his agile frame by a belt. The black vest he wore, closed by a large zipper, covered just enough for this elf to be considered wearing a shirt. Mac looked quickly at Cebu and then to Cebu's dish, which thankfully the kitten hawk had just finished his course of fish. "Hey bear, you may have lost a friend, but today you will gain a friend," Fang said with a small sparkle and a devious grin, gesturing towards Mac with his free hand. Oxheim grunted in confusion, pulling himself up from the table and, for reasons that only could make sense to his inebriated mind, stood up completely, knocking back the chair he was sitting on and flopping Fang onto the floor in the process. Mac's mouth dropped as Oxheim stood to his full height of 7 foot 2 inches, and he had to be 34 wide as he was tall. Mac immediately understood why it would be difficult for Oxheim to use the town's ferry system, or any boat for that matter. Oxheim was a big man, possibly having some giant ancestry. He locked eyes with Mac leaning on the table. Oxheim studied Mac through his obviously blurry vision. "I know you. You're that boy we rescued from that burning settlement that got attacked years ago." Oxheim boomed softly before his blurry honey-colored eyes, usually brimming with kindness, filled with tears. Then he collapsed onto his backside, crushing the chair he had previously knocked over beneath him. The snapping of wood could be heard as the ground then rumbled softly from the impact. Oxheim began rubbing his eyes, with fingers as thick as Mac's forearm, and bawling like a child, before wailing out, distorted through a combination of his tears, his hands, and the alcohol. "It's just so sad." Fang had scrambled to Oxheim's side and was struggling to position him upright. "Fang, make him get hold of himself before he tears the damn place apart," demanded Sapphire, coming out from behind the bar to see the commotion unfold. She laid her delicate hands on her tiny waist and cocked her curvaceous hips, clearly disapproving of the destruction of her property. "What do you think we are trying to do, woman?" Fang called back before lowering his voice to Oxheim, to a hushed metered tone. "Come on, big fella, you're wrecking the place. Your mother wouldn't be too happy with that, would she?" Oxheim stayed off into the middle distance a moment before sniffling. "No, I guess not, I'll behave." He propped himself against the adjacent table that was jammed between him and a very sturdy wall by some kind bystanders. With his massive size, his torso was still above the table he was facing. Fang, still staying near Oxheim just out of precaution, scanned the group sitting at the table and smiled. "Crew, this is my nephew Mac and his kitten Hawk, Cebu. They will be joining us on the hunt at the end of the week." The blonde woman made noises that acknowledged Cebu as cute. A dark-skinned man that Mac had ignored in the chaos of Oxheim's outburst was politely sipping his tea out of a shallow bowl and holding it in his palms. The only hair he had on his entire body was located between his eyebrows and chin. He had a single piercing on the cartilage of his left ear. It seemed to be a bone fragment set with a piece of amber. He set the bowl down and bowed his head before speaking in a serene tribal voice. "Hello, Mac and Cebu. We welcome the new additions to the troupe. My name is Talik Subury," Talik said with a calm smile, potting the carpet of dark stubble on his face. He wore deep dull dark red robes with white trim. The long sleeves of his robe flared at the end. The shoulders of the robe sat at the end of his toned shoulders, being loose enough to fall off them. Through the loose neckline, Mac could see long ago healed burns in the shape of chain links circling his body, distinct from how deep they were. The robe was kept closed by a leather patch reinforcing the fabric where it overlapped on his left hip. An elegantly carved stake was pierced through the pre-made holes in his robe. Natural-colored trousers covered his toned legs. The heavily tattooed elf spoke up. He was speaking with a quick pace, and a raspy voice announced, "My name is Sokomal Romain. I hope he is up to snuff for our lot. He looks a bit fresh." His accent left out the occasional letters of words for ease of speaking, another hallmark of the South foul-put accent. The small, dirty blonde woman, who had her bird's nest of frizzy hair held back by a green bandana wrapped around her head, hopped up onto the chair and locked eyes with the elf leaning forward. She wore casual clothing, loose pants, and a thin strap top. "If you're so worried about it, train him yourself, Soko," she chastised, sounding appropriate for her 5-foot stature. "I love how you know, Xylena. I'm no one's babysitter except maybe yours, Pipsqueak," Soko retorted, crossing his arms. Xylena sat back in her chair, and she crossed her arms also. "I remember that little comment next time you need to be covered at a range or healed," she said with a challenging look on her face. The petty argument was interrupted by a loud snore. Oxheim had laid his head backward on the table and fell asleep. Fang then joined the table and looked over at Mac. Sorry about Bear over there. Oh yeah, that's my nickname for Oxheim. He normally is a proud muster combatant, but on the inside, he's a big softy which comes out once he gets drunk. Fang said, gesturing to Oxheim, I thank you all for having me. Max said, bowing his head nervously, pondering silently over how much alcohol it would take to make a man of that size drunk. He doesn't even have a weapon on him and doesn't look like he studies anything martial. Why'd you do, Fang, find us some bait? Soko chided while locking eyes with Mac. Because of elves' monocolor eyes, instead of looking at people with eye directions like humans, elves would indicate the direction of attention with their whole bodies, usually very dramatically with their heads. Zebu, having returned to his position on Mac's shoulders, took the opportunity to whisper to Mac, he's testing you for how you react under pressure. Stay vigilant. Mac leaned forward after understanding this information and calmly said, my weapons are currently getting sharpened and polished. Then asked with decreasing confidence, what about you? You don't seem to follow your own rules. Soko laughed softly. I need some more time in the pot, but he has the right ingredients in him. He pulled his vest open and near his clavicle, a jet black sword hilt began emerging. He then gripped it and pulled the rest of the way out of his chest. The area he pulled it from was noticeably lighter. I don't need to carry weapons. My body contains all the weapons I need. I manipulate my many tattoos for various effects. He finished by recalling the sword back into his chest. The liquid soaked back into his body from whence it came. It seems it would be a good idea to discuss team dynamics and see where young Mac could fit in. As you could have already guessed, Mr. Steelbreaker is our frontline muscle. He specializes in rage, defense, and earth magics. Talik explained, gesturing to the completely unconscious Oxheim, who had a bit of drool coming from his snoring more. As for myself, I deal with enhancement and flame magic as well as conjure chains. All I need for weapons are these. Talik continued, raising his hands in a cold fist. Talik then opened his hands with diplomacy, offering the floor to Xylena, who was wrapping a strand of her curly nest of hair around her finger, studying the interactions between everyone. Thank you. I swear, Talik, you're the only gentleman here. Xylena said, sitting up from the table. A small jade necklace hung from her tiny neck. I fill most of the support roles, bard, healer, long-range fighter, scout. I also specialize in magic items. They are always fun little trinkets, and the ones I don't want I sell off, usually to my sister. Xylena said with a small glint in her eyes. And that money fixation is also why you're the treasurer of the troupe, Fang said with a smirk. Oh, thank you, oh fearless leader, for that interjection. Xylena sarcastically mocked Fang. Why don't you explain your role in the team? Fang replies at first by only sipping his ale before commenting, I'll show him later. What a circus of weirdos. I hope not all the god squads are like this, Zebu remarked into Mac's ears. You take your squabble outside and no weapons, you know the rules. Bellowed Sapphire before she was shuffling the two bickering drunks out the door, and a drunken chant of fight, 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 fight began to swell. Dinner and a show. Remarked Zebu again. Come on, let's go look. I want to see some action. Growled Soko, dashing to the door. Oh, it's the Comet twins again. I'm not interested, Xylena said over her drink, not even bothering to look up from it. Her jade pendant was now suspiciously missing from her necklace. Oh, I see how you are, Fang said to Xylena with a knowing look, taking note of the missing jade before gripping the oblivious Mac's shoulders. Come on, you might get some ideas on combat magic. They jostled their way out the door through the growing crowd outside. The two combatants were staring at each other over the stone pathway that divided the dirt circle in front of the bar. They were spewing insults at each other, barely heard over the rowdy crowd, each trying to make the other throw the first blow. I was the firstborn. I'm the better twin, Emery Connor said, the eldest of the twins. Well, Mum always liked me more, teased Keaton Connor, who was sloppily bouncing on his feet trying to prepare for a fight. "No, she didn't," screamed Emery, who while crossing the line drew his punch back, which started to glow, and when he threw the punch, crackling sparks flew from the end of his fist, which his brother accidentally dodged by drunkenly falling over. The spark exploded at the end of the pitch in a fizzing shower of light. Keaton, using the added shadows of mid-afternoon, manipulated his own shadow to reach up and pull his brother to the ground before scrambling on top of him. Mac looked away from the rolling pair of brothers as the blows started to get brutal. As he tried to find something to draw his attention, he saw on the railing of the porch a small jade rat that was watching the proceedings. Mac made his way over to examine it, where it then noticed him and scampered back into the bar. "Zebu, follow that rat," Mac ordered Zebu. Zebu pounced off Mac's shoulders and snaked through the forest of legs that was the crowd, following the rat. Mac was no longer interested in seeing these two men bloody each other, and with difficulty entered back into the bar, having been hampered by the crowd. He saw Zebu's progress and the rat, which ran directly for Xylena. Zebu stopped at Xylena's ankle as the rat ran up her thigh. Mac got back to the table just in time to see the jade rat climb over her shoulder and transform back into the jade pendant. Xylena just smiled. "Well done, kid, at the very least you're observant," Xylena said, smiling. "This here is a pendant of the jade animals. It allows me to create a jade animal to do my bidding. I mainly use it for scouting purposes." Mac did not have a chance to respond as everyone came back in from the spectacle. "Did you see anything you liked?" Fang asked Mac, circling behind him as he returned to his seat. "I liked it when he knocked his tooth clean out of his head," interrupted Soko, clearly pumped by the fight. "Sokomol, I believe he was talking to Mac," Talik remarked, calmly retaking his seat. Soko put his hands up in a sarcastic form of apology and allowed Mac to speak. "I like that Spock thing. It seems like a pretty useful attack," Mac said, nodding. "It is useful and it is also basic," Fang explained, "and you saw that coming from a drunk man. The thing about basic magic is while everyone knows it, if you are creative it can become very powerful and useful. Can you teach it to me?" Mac asked hopefully. "Sure, kid," Fang replied before dismounting his stool, then announcing, "Can you get Oxheim home before he wakes up and give his mother my hello?" He began walking to the bar to say his goodbyes to Sapphire. Mac followed him. "Talik, you get the bulk of him, he'll get the rest," Soko said solemnly, donning his long-sleeved traveling cloak that hung on the back of the chair, and raising his hood. His darkened face disappeared into the shadows of the hood. "Isn't that always the plan?" sighed Talik, shoulders dropping slightly, while Fang and Sapphire were discussing the broken chair and Fang's tub. Mac turned back to see how they were going to move Oxheim. Talik had clasped his hands together to increase concentration before his muscles flayed, and he shouldered the entirety of Oxheim's upper half onto his mantle. He pulled down on his slack arms as handholds. Soko quickly put Oxheim's massive boots onto his shoulders and steadied them. "Are you trying to catch flies?" sarcastically inquired Zebu, prompting Mac to close his mouth. A gate from the feat of strength performed by Talik. Mac walked over and held the door open for them, and the two men muscled Oxheim through the door and began moving down the path. The duo then carefully stepped over the unconscious bodies of the Comet twins. The brothers were both bruised but breathing. Each of the twins had a cold towel laid over their eyes by some kind patrons. "You will get used to this, kid. Welcome to the crew," Xylena said as she looked up at Mac as she passed through the open door. Mac did not reply to Xylena as his attention was brought back to Sapphire by her call. "Hey, Mac, make sure your uncle stays out of trouble," Sapphire said, locking eyes with Mac, her brilliant blue eyes almost distracting him from the flesh spilling from her neckline, the key word being almost. He was a young man after all. "Will do, Sapphire," Mac replied as he followed Fang out the door. The smell of vanilla and strawberries disappeared the second the door closed. The abrupt absence made Mac long to go back inside. Oxheim's party had disappeared from view, and they casually walked along the path. Fang's thumbs were hooked in his pockets as he resumed his alert shamble. "I gotta ask, are you two a thing or just a fling?" Zebu asked. Fang laughed towards the sky, his laugh hoarse yet full of life, before answering. Zebu, I'm starting to take a shine to you, but yes, we are dating. I've been considering asking her to marry me. I fear that she will say no, since she controls that bar with her charm and seduction magic. Having a man in the picture might decrease the allure. Wait, she was using magic? Mac asked, dumbfounded. What? Did you think that smell was her perfume? Fang chortled, then seeing the answer on Mac's face, explained. Saf is a master of a section of Inkor magic called lust. Having been born beautiful and then blossomed into a goddess, she thought it was the most logical step to use her assets to her advantage. Usually, it's a magic set that is associated with loose women, courtesans, and hearts, but Saf has mastered it by being a classy lady. That's why that bar is such a success, with her magic being so strong as it is. Since no one knows she's using it, they can't resist its charm. That's why it smelled like a bottomy. She wasn't interested in charming me at all, or couldn't because I'm an animal. Zebu surmised. More like couldn't. Lust magic doesn't work on drastically different species than the caster. Fang replied. Mac nodded now, starting to see the nuance of magic. The idea he held that fighting with magic was just about overpowering your opponent with bright lights and loud bangs was slowly being deconstructed. His mind began kindling ideas of how he could tip the scales in his favor. Where exactly are we going, Fang? Zebu pondered. This caused pause, as this was the first time Zebu had called him by his name. Back to Clay's, we can do some training by the lake. Fang responded before turning north and heading back along the path to Clay's. The trio chatted politely as they walked. Zebu, having finally dropped his grudge, and sat on Fang's shoulders as they made their way home. As they approached the Ebenria house, they saw Clay tending to her flourishing and spectacular garden. The enchanted scarecrow on the corner turned on its perch, studied them with its painted-on eyes for a moment. It deemed them as not intruders, thus belonging there, and went about its sentry duties. Its patchwork clothes and bell-up skin were old and weather-worn, and its slash of a mouth hung agape, ready to shrilly scream at all not welcome in the garden. That thing always unnerves me, sis, Fang stated, leaning on the fence. Are the village kids stealing stuff again, Aunt Claire? Mac inquired, leaning on the weather-beaten wooden fence. Yes, they are, so I had to bring out the scarecrow from the basement, Claire replied from underneath a bush. Small amounts of snipping were heard, then the air was released from the end of some stalks she was trimming as she placed torn green fruit into a basket before standing up. Do you know what unnerves me? Cat and dog getting along, Claire remarked, slinging the basket under her arm, which was filled with greenery and produce of various shapes and purposes, most only recognizable to those who had experience with magical flora. Have any messages arrived from the Fosters? Mac asked excitedly. No, not yet, but you know how they are. They will send a Finch directly to you, Mac. Not to the house. They always are excited to complete commissions, replied Claire, still bemused by Zebu riding on Fang's shoulders. I'm going to teach him a couple of spells, sis, then we will turn in for the night, Fang said. You know when dinner is sick, but don't let me interrupt you training. I got to get these to Maddie Mansour at the apothecary. She says I grow the most succulent bulbous jayhawk, Claire said, disappearing into the door that opened into the connected garden. To the lake then, Fang said, setting off easterly towards the lake. Once getting close enough to smell the damp air caused by the cascading waterfall, Fang stopped and admired the scenery as Mac caught up with him. The waterfall was the main source of water for the town, and one of the main reasons a settlement was started here. The other was that Rosecross was positioned in a box canyon plateau halfway up a large mountain, making it very hard to siege. The water from the waterfall came from melting snow at the top of the peak, where because of its altitude it snowed constantly. This snow emptied into a lake which contains very quickly reproducing fish. This origin lake and its connecting paths were always guarded to prevent anybody from sabotaging it. The water exists in a constant loop due to the water cycle, going deep underground after running through the town and boiling from underground pressure, then starting the process again. At the mouth of the lake inside the town was a large partially submerged grate that kept the fish from escaping downstream and filtered out any contaminants that may have gotten that far, such as dirt from people swimming or leaves that fell into the lake. This station was manned and maintained at all times. The water was a mostly clean murky blue. Fish can be seen swimming around within arm's reach of the banks. The ground that touched the water had been turned to smooth marble some 50 years back by a team of alchemists to honor the natural gift the town was given. The marble also made the lake cleaner but gave the depths a ghostly glow during the day. It has been said that between the fish and the waterfall, technically Rose Cross can self-isolate, but instead has become a melting pot of outcasts. Fishermen dotted the lake in small flat boats collecting the fish that entered through the waterfall. Their boats dodged the 3 natural sapphire bark trees that grew in the lake. The sapphire bark only grew underwater and has wood a beautiful deep blue, and is thus a sought-after material. A small grove near the wood mill had been created out of transplants. A stray kitten hawk, whose feathers were matted from being wild, sat at the edge of the lake lapping up some water, at least until some mean-spirited kids exiting from the cave behind the waterfall threw a rock at it, scaring it off. Its hiss was drowned out completely by the sound of the water crashing down. Fang, Mac, and Zebu stood each in their own world observing the scene. Although they had each seen it numerous times, it still was a sight of calm wonder. Today I'm going to teach you 3 spells. 1 hair manipulation, 2 that spark spell you saw earlier, and a featherlight spell allowing you to increase your movement capabilities by becoming lighter. Announced Fang, bringing everyone out of their nature-induced stupor, talking slightly louder to compensate for the waterfall. Hair manipulation, how would that be useful? Scoffed Mac. Didn't we just establish that powerful magic isn't all about loud noises and pretty colors? Fang remarked and gestured for Zebu to dismount. Zebu then perched himself on a nearby tree to observe. Fang then whipped his long shaggy hair forward, and a storm of needles flew from within its mass and peppered into a nearby tree. Mac jumped back as a reflex and raised his shield instinctively. That, with it being still on the workbench of the Fosters, did him no good. Never assume someone is unarmed, Mac, Fang said calmly as he readjusted his hair. But I don't have long hair like yours, Mac said, gesturing to his hair. It was long enough to have waves in it, but not long enough to tie back if it got in his way. No, but you do have very hairy forearms. With just the first half of the spell you can stiffen your arm hair and use it as an improvised spiked club, Fang remarked before continuing. Once that's mastered, you can manually snap off quills of hair and use them as, say, a lockpick. You say that from experience? Zebu chided from his perch in the trees, his tail swaying casually. Actually, yes it was. I escaped from a cell in Kandor doing just that, he replied before setting his eyes back on Mac. Then the next step is firing them away from your body. The key is focusing your energy into your hair follicles until they stand on the end and harden. You can practice that one and your own maybe during dinner, so you can get practice splitting your attention. The first spell I will properly teach you is the spark spell, Fang said before causing his fist to glow and releasing it away from his body with a casual sweep of his arm. When it stopped and exploded, it caused Mac to cover his ears and eyes from the blinding light and deafening wail. A versatile little spell can have various attributes with it and cause direct damage if done right. Fang explained magical combat can get pretty intense. Try to keep up. For this one, focus your energy into your fist until it glows, Fang instructed Mac as he sat cross-legged on the ground observing him. Okay, Mac said slowly. He studied his raised fist. He was still reeling from the explosion. He imagined with all his might it glowing. After focusing for not an uncomfortable amount of time, a slight sheen developed across his skin before it slowly grew into a fireside glow. Come on, you have to do it with more passion, Fang growled, his eyes as intense as the earlier explosion. I'm trying, Mac grunted as the light flickered due to his concentration being split before it began to shine brilliantly. The diamond-like flicker danced off the shaded tree trunks. Good. Now throw it. Detach your energy and send it flying, Fan directed. Mac whipped his arm as hard as he could, but then noticed the glow still encompassed his hand. I said detach your energy, Mac. Fan chided from his position, head leaning against the tree he sat near. I know what you said, Uncle Fan, Mac said angrily, who now resorted to furiously waving his glowing appendage to dislodge the orb. Having planted his feet in frustration and given one last big throw, the glowing orb of magic flew quickly, almost hitting Fan, who did the bare minimum movement to dodge it. The orb soared into the middle of the lake before fizzling out pathetically. This upset a fisherman who told them off from afar. Sorry, Mr. Sears, didn't mean to distract you from your fishing, Fan said with a friendly wave before turning to Mac. Your distance is impressive, but you need to be able to release that energy when you intend to. Also, you need to work on effects afterward. For example, do you want it to blind your opponent or deafen them to distract them or injure them, among other things? Fan explained, then added, also no need for honorifics, just call me Fan. I just wanted it off my hand, Mac said, face red with embarrassment, only to turn a deeper shade of red as he heard Cebu wheezing from the treetops. Mac, in retaliation, threw a spock directly at Cebu, which exploded with a deep pop, knocking the cat off the branch and causing Cebu to soar to Fan's shoulders. You have to motivate him to excel unintentionally, I have found, Cebu said calmly. Mac, who was brimming with anger and embarrassment, was snapped back to focus from the realization he just performed the spell perfectly, and to test himself did 3 in quick succession. Emotions are a powerful asset. If you keep them in control, don't let them control you, it will be your downfall. Fan said, will you two quit? You're scaring the fishes. Mr. Sears bellowed from the lake. Yes, we are done making loud noises now, Fan called out before turning to Mac in a lower tone. Now let's do the featherlight spell. It will be less noisy and allow for better agility on the battlefield. Jump for me as a benchmark, requested Fan as he scratched Cebu's head. Mac bent his knees and pushed off from the ground as hard as he could, getting maybe 1.5 feet off the ground. A feat that was not impressive, as most of that was achieved by curling his legs midair. Now imagine yourself as light as a feather and try to jump. You will be able to jump high if the spell works, Fan explained while noting the height of Mac's jump. How would making me lighter allow me to jump and move faster? Mac asked. Your muscles are used to pushing a certain amount of weight at all times as you move about your day. If that weight got, say, half as heavy, but you exerted the same force as you would normally, you will move twice as fast, Fan explained. Mac, now feeling slightly foolish, closed his eyes and tried to imagine a feather and how light it was. He imagined himself being pushed with a breeze and floating on it. Feeling he was ready, he pushed his legs down and jumped with the same amount of effort. Fang and Cebu watched as Mac's efforts were fruitful and he doubled his jumping height. They also watched as Mac, who had his eyes closed and not paying attention, slammed his head into the branch above him. Mac fell, gripping his head more from shock than actual pain. Fang smiled, walking over and offering Mac a hand up from the tree-root-riddled ground he landed on. That's the ticket, bud, but try to pay attention to what you're doing, said Fang before looking around and grinning further. Added, you know what? Make it on top of the water tower on the house and we will turn in for the day. Every house in Rosecross had 2 water tanks, one on top of the house or in a high position, the other set into the ground with an access hole. The water runs through the house by gravity, allowing the convenience of running water from the first tank to the second. The water from the second tank gets collected, recycled, and purified by the town council. Residents either had the option to fill the tank from the river themselves, usually magically, or pay someone to fill it for them. A lot of people found the sight of a large metal tank unsightly and used different methods of covering it up, ranging from painting it to covering it in gardens or surrounding it with trees. The Urban-Rear household made it look like an excessively large dormer on their pitch-pond roof. All right, that shouldn't be hard, Mac exclaimed and performed the mental process again and again without jumping, trying to get it to be second nature and improving the technique. The sun was beginning to wane over the town of Rosecross. The rays grew long and orange as it tipped over the edge of the canyon walls. Rosecross had 4 fewer hours of the day than the rest of the continent of Iplella because of the high walls that surrounded the settlement. These walls take 2 hours in the morning and 2 in the evening. During this time, the lamps were being lit across the town. A large crystal ball atop the central tower began to glow like a dull sun, casting long shadows across the town. With sudden noises of effort, Mac flew silhouetted against the natural setting sun and landed cleanly onto the dormer that contained the water tank. "Hey Fang, I did it. I'm up here," Mac called happily, lost in jubilation as he held onto the dormer roof and slanted his stance on the roof's pitch. Fang had been watching the setting sun dance on the water surface and chatting with Cebu, telling him of his exploits, while Mac concentrated on his task. Hearing Mac's call, he turned and smiled, clapping in congratulations. "Good job, Mac," Fang replied from his crouched position at the base of the tree. A window opened on the ground floor and Aunt Claire leaned out of it. Cupping her hands around her mouth, she called out, "Come on fellas, dinner's ready." Fang sauntered inside and Cebu quickly flew through the open window before Claire had shut it. "All right, how do I get down?" Mac asked himself, beginning to look down to scan his surroundings, his milestone of progress, making him forget his fear of heights. As Mac looked down, his vision twisted, and the 20 or so feet he actually was from the dull green grass quickly became 200 feet in his mind's eye. His heart raced and his palms moistened, loosening his grip. "Come on, Mac, you're not that high," stammered Mac as he sidled along the roof to his bedroom window, climbing inside to safety. He waited until his heart had returned to a normal rhythm before he ventured downstairs again. As Mac descended the stairs, Fang looked slightly disappointed at him. "I hoped you would use the featherlight spell to jump off the roof so you didn't have fall damage to hurt you," Fang said, seated at the table opposite the steps. "Well, you should have said that then. It probably would have helped with my fear of heights," Mac replied before pouring himself a drink and designating his spot at the table. Fang chuckled at this information and shot a side eye at Cebu, who understood the situation and decided to be mischievously silent on the matter. Mac then walked over to the stove pot and fished out what looked like a fish-sized raisin with an implement and placed it on a plate. Holding the plate in his left hand, Mac gathered himself some utensils. The smell of burnt rubber left the pot as he lifted the lid. This was a good indicator the bulbous jayhawk was cooked correctly. "Didn't you just pick these jayhawk today, Claire? I thought they took 3 days to stabilize," Mac asked as he took his seat. "Yes, they do, but I picked those 3 days ago, darling," Claire explained before noticing a small homing finch on the window tapping the glass. "I'll get it, sis. You sit down and enjoy the meal," Fang said, smiling at his sister. His friendly smile almost hid the sharp points of his teeth. "I hope it's from the Fosters," Mac exclaimed, cutting into his meal. "Don't get your hopes up, kid," Cebu said, lifting his head from the bowl of chopped jayhawk that Claire had diced for him. Fang went to the window and pulled the message from the bird's carrying container and unfurled it, reading it aloud. "My dearest sweet sugar plum, I will be late for dinner tonight. The minister of Rosecross had requested my baking expertise to create some additional sweet pastries for a meeting between other settlements in 5 days. I must make some preparations tonight to be ready in time. Save some food for me, your squishy doughboy Bartholomew. P.S. While we have the house to ourselves during the hunt, maybe we could puddle do. Bartholomew, there are children listening." Reed Fang, who cut off an apparently explicit part of the letter and tapped the bird on the head to have it returned to sender. Fang, noticing Mac's disappointment on his way back to the table, said, "No long faces, but you have training to do. Make sure you make your arm hair as stiff as possible while focusing on eating. Can't training wait for a nice sweet meal of jayhawk?" Claire inquired, once again fawning over the boy. "If he is going to survive out there, he is going to have to be able to perform magic as naturally as he breathes, without thought, without focus. I'm only trying to keep the boy safe, sis," Fang said dismissively. "Actually, picking the bulbous jayhawk as a meal is a great training tool. Since most people get utterly distracted by the overwhelming sweetness of the J-Hut, they lose themselves in a daydream of flavor. Let me make this interesting. He snapped a quill off his head and placed it behind Mac, stabbing it into the backrest of the chair. Fang then returned to his own chair and pointed at Mac across the table. If you lose focus, I can stab you from over here until you gain your composure again, like so. Fang said, growing the spike behind Mac's back until it stuck into Mac, causing him to wince. All right, I get the idea, Mac said through a grimace, and began focusing his energy into the follicles of his forearms, which flared up and hardened. As soon as they did, the spike pressing into his lumbar retreated. Good. By the end of the evening you should be a master at doing magic subconsciously, Fang said before picking up the J-Hut with his fingers and ripping it savagely with his teeth. The dinner continued as a normal dinner would, with the sound of utensils hitting plates, the gnashing of teeth, and conversation. Mac was having a hard time participating in the conversation, though, as he was focusing everything he had on keeping his energy flayed. This even caused him to move in a segmented fashion at first. Fang was right about two things. The first being that the beautifully sweet bulbous J-Hut did distract Mac from the task at hand, which resulted every time in a prodding from the spike at his side. The second is that by the end of the dinner, subconscious magic now came second nature to Mac. This was proven when he dried his shirt like nothing after he let some water escape his mouth from a particularly funny joke Fang told. I think that's enough of that. You can eat normally now, Fang said, and Mac felt the spike at his side wither and disappear, allowing him to relax. They continued the dinner. Mac now joined in the conversation more readily. The stream of conversation was interrupted by another homing finch tapping on the window. Fang once again stood up to let it in, and it flew past him directly onto the table in front of Mac, spinning around and wiggling its tail feathers excitedly, displaying its garish painted message holder. Now that is definitely from the Fosters, Mac said, unfurling the light parchment with floral decorations on the corners. It read as follows in beautiful pink calligraphy. Dear Mr. Macabre, we have completed your armor set and finished giving your weapons their repairs and tune-up. We have also added some wonderful features to your attire that we think would give you great pleasure in using. Please send this homing finch back to reserve an appointment an hour after Rosecross dawn. Happy to be of service. Yours truly, Brooke Foster, Master Seamstress. Douglas Foster, Master Armorer. Artie Foster, Master Weaponsmith. Thank you for going, GAYEH. Mac had read the letter aloud to everyone. He noted how each contributor had written their contribution in their own handwriting. He excitedly walked across the room clutching the letter. He then grabbed some scrap paper from the desk and a pen. Once returned to the table, he hastily wrote his reply before looking up. We will be able to keep that appointment, right? Mac inquired. His excitement of the occasion made him stutter and fumble his words. Of course we will, Fang said, smiling, but only if you get some good sleep in. My little warrior needs shut-eye, Claire said, reaching over and pinching Mac's cheeks. Okay, that's settled then. Let's reply and I'll head to bed. I'll shower in the morning, Mac said hastily, rolling up his reply, fitting it into the scroll holder, and tapping the homing finch on the head. It zoomed out the window faster than the eye could track, much less follow. Try sleeping in your shelter so you can get used to it, and maybe pack some things you want in there so when you leave on the hunt you have everything you'd need, Fang pointed out while taking a position on the couch and pulling a blanket over his knees. Makes sense. Good night, Fang. Good night, Claire, and come on, Cebu, Mac said, walking up the stairs. Cebu flew to the top banister and then into Mac's room once he opened the door. Mac crouched down and pulled the little blue crystal around his neck and drew the hatch that led to his abode, disappearing inside of it.